And almost there. There we go. All right. Give it another minute or two. Allow people to log in. Good afternoon, Natan.
Good afternoon, Rabbi. Don't tell me that I'm the only one.
No. We've got a few on YouTube, a few on Zoom.
Oh, yeah, I see.
Just giving it another minute or so to let people finish logging in, and then we'll get down to work.
I will not be in a video, Rabbi, not because I don't like that you will see my face, but because I will start eating my lunch, and I don't think that you will like to see me eating.
I certainly understand that, and I appreciate your consideration.
You're welcome.
Especially because I haven't had my lunch yet, and I don't want my stomach to start growling into the microphone.
Exactly, and you can't talk and eat at the same time.
It's very, very hard to do. I've a few times that I've had a lunchtime slot in a group or a conference where I was supposed to both present and eat. Pretty much you have to choose to do one or the other, and usually it's just teach, because you can't really teach in between bites. It doesn't work. All right. Well, I think 3 minutes is a fair cushion. And I certainly will understand that there are some people, I'm sure, who are attending the rally down at Lake Eola here in Orlando in support of Israel during this latest outburst of violence, the most extreme we've seen in quite a few years. And we hope that that comes to a swift and peaceful end. And in addition to our prayers, please consider that as we continue to study Torah, that when we are far away and we have made the donations we have done, we have made the calls or letters to representatives of support, at a certain point, all that is left is to carry on in the honor of those that are on the front lines, and to make sure that we are maintaining Torah wherever we are, as that is ultimately what Judaism stands for. So with them in mind, we are going to turn to what may appear to be a rather mundane and picky subject, but I hope you'll find meaning for it, not only from context of the past, but also in the present context as well. So we are going to begin in Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. It is a whole new book, thankfully sewn together into the scroll of Torah, so we don't have to pull a new one off the shelf. And we are going to pick up on chapter 3. We're going to start right at the beginning of chapter 3 with a very familiar beginning. Ele Toldot, right? This is the introductory phrase that comes in numerous places in the Torah, although many more back in the time of the book of Bereshit, the book of Genesis, where we begin to get a lineage, a bit of a genealogy, some information about a family. In this case, we're going to see that it's going to give us a lot more information than just names. This is the line of Aaron and Moses at the time that the Lord spoke with Moses at Mount Sinai. These are the names of Aaron's sons: Nadav, the firstborn, and Avihu, Eleazar, and Itamar. Those were the names of Aaron's sons, the anointed priests who were ordained for priesthood. So those four were the four that were his sons at the time of Mount Sinai, and thus became the four children from which the Kohen line would be transmitted. However, verse 4, but Nadav and Avihu died by the will of the Lord when they offered alien fire before the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai, and they left no sons. So it was Eleazar and Itamar who served as priests in the lifetime of their father Aaron. So Nadav and Avihu, as very famously was recounted in Parashat Shmini, die when they bring their own incorrect offering of fire at the time of the inauguration of the Mishkan. We don't need to rehash that here. I've talked about it in Parashat Shmini recordings before, so you can refer to those if you'd like more discussion on that. However, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, "Advance the tribe of Levi and place them in attendance upon Aaron the priest to serve him." Before we get into a bit more description of that, I just want to point out something that is often overlooked, which is the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi is the larger home tribe of Aaron and Moses, and thus it is the home tribe of the Kohanim, of the priests. The Kohanim are one specific sub-family-ish group within the overall tribe of Levi. And in verse 5 and 6 and so on, we are now going to move from talking about the Kohanim, the Aaron's line, to the Levites as a general group, which of course would include Moses if he didn't already have a rather special job, but would be including all of the additional members of the extended family of Levi and their unique role. So we move on to a bit more information about that on verse 7. They shall perform duties for him and for the whole community before the tent of meeting, doing the work of the tabernacle. They shall take charge of all the furnishings of the tent of meeting, a duty on behalf of the Israelites, doing the work of the tabernacle. You shall assign the Levites to Aaron and his sons. They are formally assigned to him from among the Israelites. You shall make Aaron and his sons responsible for observing their priestly duties, and any outsider who encroaches shall be put to death. So we get a brief list of some of the broad categories of work, but you'll notice that this broad category of work is very broad. That is to say, they are being given duties. They are being put in attendance. They are dealing with the furnishings, the vessels of the tent of meeting. But that's about the only description we're getting in this section. Now, we get different examples of some of the carrying jobs that are given to the Levites in other parts of the census that takes place in this part of the Torah. But here, as they are being more formally appointed, it's still very vague exactly what their job is. And even more vague is why them? Why are they doing this job? We can see, though, however, when we get down to verse 11, that God also wants to talk about that topic a little bit. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I hereby take the Levites from among the Israelites in place of all the firstborn, the first issue of the womb among the Levites. The Levites shall be mine. For every firstborn is mine. At the time that I smote every firstborn in the land of Egypt, I consecrated every firstborn in Israel, man and beast, to myself, to be mine, the Lord's. So what we seem to be having here is a decision by God to say that, yes, in a neutral setting, the firstborn of each Israelite family would be taking the jobs that were described for the Levites. However, God has made a substitution. God has said that the firstborns of all of the people will not have that job. Instead, the Levites, 100%, firstborn, second, third, whatever, all of them will have that job in the place of all of the Israelite firstborns. Now, the explanation of why God has dibs on the firstborns in the first place is because of the plague of the firstborn that struck the land of Egypt. And that when God chose to spare the firstborn of the Israelites, in a sense, those Israelites now owe God above and beyond the owing that all of us have towards God for our life. And therefore, God has the option to demand more service from them. God chooses not to demand more from them individually, but instead to move the duty that they would have onto the shoulders of the Levites. Is everybody following that version, that form, that explanation? Questions or comments? Okay. Then the section goes on. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say then when you give money, pinyon haben,
Correct.
right? You give money to a Levite for your firstborn.
To a Kohen, technically.
But to a Kohen, okay. But I mean, haven't they already been substituted? I mean, is that just tzedakah, or is? I mean, I don't understand the correlation with this particular passage. If the firstborn, the Levites are taking the place of the firstborn. Go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right. That there seems to be a parallel concern here, which is not 100% clear. On the one hand, like you just said, and as God has said, not only for the firstborn of the Israelites, but also the firstborn of our animals, God does still demand a either donation or redemption of that firstborn in the form of some sort of pidyon, of a redeeming. For firstborn sons, it's the pidyon ben. For animals, it would usually have been a sacrifice, but for animals that couldn't be sacrificed, there would be a redeeming of the animal into cash, and then the cash would be used for it in place of it. So God does not seem to have relinquished all claim to the firstborns. Instead, what seems to be happening here is that God is taking the Levites to do a certain job of the firstborn. It's not that God is saying that the firstborn don't still belong to him. It's what God is saying is that he is transferring the responsibilities, the duties of the firstborn to the Levites exclusively. So the firstborn still have an obligation. The firstborn still need to be redeemed, both animal and human. But the workload, so to speak, that is a separate category, a separate concept, and that is what's being moved over. That's what's being transferred to the Levites here. So they still need to be redeemed, but even if they weren't redeemed, they don't get to do the job because the job has been transferred to the Levites. And why the job was transferred, but the full obligation wasn't released, that's a very good question. And why was the job transferred in the first place? We still haven't seen here why that would have been done. And just in case you're interested in having that job, well, that's where the rest of chapter 3 goes. The rest of chapter 3 goes on to the census of the different Levite clans and giving us the different jobs that they will do, and according to how many people that are in them, what sort of tasks they will be given. So the rest of chapter 3 is a little bit more technical, a little bit more like reading a census report. And so we're not going to go into that ourselves. But if we back up first to the question of why were the Levites given this job, we may want to ask first, well, exactly what jobs are they being given? As I mentioned at the beginning, and back in verse 6, we're being told that they are being placed in attendance, that they are being stood for him, meaning that they are going to serve this form, and that they are being advanced, right? Hakrev is this unusual verb in this category, in this context. We need to figure out what the job is before we know whether or not we should complain that the firstborn of other people didn't get it. Once we figured that out, then we can also talk about why the Levites might have been singled out, and more relevantly, how we should feel about any of these differentiations at all. All right, so any more questions from the section that we've now read from chapter 3? All right, then let's jump to our commentaries. All right, so
Yeah, I had a quick question.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
yes, go ahead.
I had a quick question on verses 7 and 8. I guess it's a question on translation because I'm seeing the root word avodah here a number of times.
Yes. So at the end of verse 7, and then also again at the end of verse 8, the root avodah for work is what's being done here. So what's in our translation on the screen, the word avodah is being translated as both doing and as the word work. So in a literal-ish, which is not always ideal because not every language works well exactly to convey the same meaning as the other language, just because the words could be translated literally the same way. But if I wanted to, I could say, they shall perform duties for him and for the whole community before the tent of meeting, working the work of the tabernacle. But as you can tell, that sounds a little off in English. But that's always the challenge of a translator. Do you try to capture the poetry of the original by using the same word in multiple forms? Or do you recognize that poetry is totally lost in the new language, like in English, and English prefers variety of verbs and nouns and adjectives rather than a repetition of them? Most authors will go for a variety in order to capture what is more the flavor of the original Hebrew, even though it loses something of the poetry. But just like in our discussions regarding Shabbat, the definition of work, the definition of attending to, these are not self-evident. And so it's not surprising that we're going to look to our commentaries to help us with this. And we're going to start with Rashi because he is a great place to start. And wherein consists their ministering? Sorry, the translation I drew from today is a little bit more archaic. So what do we actually know about the job, their attendance, their work? Because the care of the sanctuary, that is to say, that no stranger should approach it, was committed to his charge, meaning to the Levites. As it is said from Numbers 18, the Lord said to Aaron, you and your sons and the ancestral house under your charge shall bear any guilt connected with the sanctuary. You and your sons alone shall bear any guilt connected with your priesthood. And the Levites aided them. This, therefore, was their ministering. So Rashi, based off the Midrashim, is saying their main job was not looking after the stuff or moving things around or even singing that we hear about in other places. Their main job was helping to make sure that nobody who wasn't a Kohen would come into the temple itself. And this is called an assistance. This is being called an aiding rather than a unique charge, because ultimately a breach of the temple precincts or the Mishkan precincts at the time was the responsibility of the Kohanim. Technically, the Kohanim were the ones responsible if a breach happened. So it is assistance from the Levites to prevent that from going. It's not their job. They're helping someone else out, the Kohanim, with their job, the protection of that territory. How does that work? All right, well, if you're not quite sure about that, let's take a look at Siftei Chachamim, which is the commentary on Rashi. So these are not two topics. What are they referring to? They're referring to back in verse number 6, where it says that they will be placed in attendance. And then in verse 7, it says that they will perform duties. Now, one thing I want to point out before we move on is that there are different verbs that are being used here, right? V'ha'amadita, right? That they are being stood up for him, meaning with Aaron. And that they are shamru, right? Shamru is a word that can mean to perform a duty. It can also mean a word to guard. Shomer is a type of guard. So that is why it is very easy to understand why they are focusing on the protection of the temple precincts as being a major role. And indeed, what Siftei Chachamim is saying is that there aren't even a variety of roles. This is the job. that they would serve and also preserve, shomer, right, shamru, their guardianship, because there is no other service aside from guarding the sanctuary, which was the service of Aaron and his sons. So Siftei Chachamim is saying, why would Rashi focus on this job of protecting? Why not focus on the later jobs we see of carrying stuff? Because this is the only job that can be described as assisting Aaron and his sons, the Kohanim. That the other jobs are their own jobs. The other jobs are their own duties of serving God, of serving the community. This is the job for somebody that is taking care of a job for someone else. This is the only assistant job that they are getting. So what were they assisting with? Based off Numbers 18, they are assisting with protecting the territory from being invaded by any of us, anyone who wasn't supposed to be in the holier precincts of the temple space. Is everyone following that logic? So yes, the Levites had many jobs, but if we're talking about their assistant jobs, they only had one, said Rashi, and that job was protecting the territory, keeping the zone safe.
Right. Rabbi,
Yes.
the verse 7, it gives the location, which is the location for this is before the tent. So that tells us that.
It gives us like
they're
literally their guard post.
Right, right.
It tells us where they are stationed. But again, it takes a careful reading to realize that verse 6 is saying very specifically that they are serving, that they are helping the Kohanim. And for us to then recognize, well, what help are they giving to the Kohen? Because it's very easy to confuse the help that they do on behalf of the nation and the help that they do on behalf of Aaron. And of course, their general duties that they have towards God directly. And that's why when you look down further on in verse 8, we see very clearly that they are doing in verse 8, that they are doing duty on behalf of the Israelites. So we can see that from verse 8 on, that we are going to get more information about their duties on behalf of the rest of us. But verse 6 and 7 was talking about duties on behalf of Aaron and the Kohanim. So that's why Rashi is being so particular, as Siftei Chachamim is pointing out, that they only had one job for the Kohanim, and that was protecting the zone, because that technically wasn't the Levites' responsibility. That technically was the Kohanim's responsibility, and the Levites were being given the task of assisting them in that responsibility. They didn't excuse the Kohanim from this job. They were just helping out with it. All right. With that in mind, we then turn to some of our other commentaries who look at it a little bit differently. They take some more of the big picture version. So in verse 150, earlier in Bamidbar, God had already told Moses to appoint them to be in charge of all the furnishings of the tabernacle, as well as the tabernacle itself, and to carry it during the journeys. They had also been warned not to allow any non-Levite to come close to the tabernacle. Now that the Levites were to be appointed as performing service for the priests, Aaron and his descendants. So Chizkuni is trying to show you how really this is the culmination of everything that they've already been told to do, to look after the furnishings, to look after the tabernacle itself, to look after the ark, and to guard the territory. And that this is being put together in this verses, and you shouldn't allow it to confuse you that they had these multiple jobs to perform. And indeed, Sforno is going to try and explain that in greater detail, as well as explain who was responsible for what. The ultimate responsibility for anything connected with the tabernacle was Aaron's, as we know from Numbers 18:1, the verse that Rashi began with. As a result of these verses, the service performed by the Levites was in the nature of being assistants to the priests, comprising standing guard over the tabernacle, protecting it against the entry of people not in a fit state for one reason or another. They had to ensure that the vessels of the tabernacle remained not only in good condition, but were not stolen, and so on. The second half of that verse in chapter 18 refers to no non-priests being allowed within the sacred domain, reserved for either the priests or even only the high priest. So it is trying to clear up for us any misconceptions we might have had that their service in the guarding is as a form of assistance, hence all the focus on the language of assistance that we've seen so far. And this is reminding us that ultimately the responsibility rested on Aaron's and then his sons' shoulders for everything that went on in the tabernacle. And that even though the Levites were given jobs, ultimately final responsibility, final culpability was on Aaron's shoulders. But we still haven't answered, now that we know more of what they were doing, we still haven't answered why they were the ones being given this job. Why not those firstborn or anyone else to do these jobs? Well, Sforno again tries to give us his interpretation of this. Had it not been for the sin of the golden calf, it would have been the duty and privilege of the members of the Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin, to carry out the tasks now allocated to the Levites. So Sforno's of the opinion that if there had not been the general participation in the golden calf debacle, that it would be the regular people, the non-Levites, non-Kohanim, who were involved in the highest level of authority, the Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin, which we saw being put together in its overall outline during the giving of the Ten Commandments in Parashat Yitro, that they would have had the honor of doing this job, of being the protectors of the territory and of carrying out the other furnishing jobs and such. However, because they essentially failed in their duties during the time of the golden calf, that job was taken away from them. It was never instituted because the Mishkan had not been built yet, but they also lost the opportunity that they would have had if they had been able to prevent the golden calf incident. But by extension, who do we know did not engage in the golden calf incident? Who do we know remained loyal to God without willingness to participate in the worship of the golden calf? The Levites. We know from that section of the Torah that the Levites were willing to stand up to everyone and not participate in the worship of the golden calf. And more to the point, not to put too fine an edge on it, they were willing to work with Moses to root out the ringleaders and to bring to task, quite physically and bloodily, those who were involved in the higher echelons of that conspiracy. So the Levites showed no remorse or no mercy when asked to carry out that duty of attacking those who had been most responsible for the golden calf debacle. Their ruthlessness, to use it in a more general, neutral term, was part of what made them the proper people to carry out this job, to then stand guard for the temple and for the Mishkan which preceded it, because they had already proven that should a person try to violate these rules, they were prepared to use lethal force. That is something that is hard to do against your own citizenry, to be willing to use lethal force when somebody is trying to transgress one of the most basic and primary forms of your community's standards, your community faith. Not everybody is able or willing to take that action. The Levites had shown that they were, and thus they are given this job. Likewise, there are other commentaries that argue that the firstborn also proved themselves unreliable when they participated in the sin of the golden calf, and thus the Levites were given their job in this section. So questions and comments on that interpretation of the Levites' role and why they are the ones being given it.
I have a question. The Levites were known when in their blessing from Jacob for acts of violence. They were known to be kind of warriors or strong. So I'm assuming that they had some kind of military training or in some way, because I see them now as guards, more than just priests walking around singing, but I see them as kind of a military unit assigned to secure the Mishkan, which is kind of new to me.
So indeed, the Levites, or rather Levi and Simeon, the two brothers who carried out the slaughter of Shechem, they are described in their father's blessing to them as being men of violence and of having a perhaps predilection towards violence. So there are many who interpret this job being given to them as a way of putting their violent tendencies to good use. That if they are prone to violence, put them somewhere where that may be an asset, where that might be an advantage to the community, rather than having them be violent in ways that are outside the bounds of the law. This is in some ways similar to the appointment of Shimshon, of Samson, another person who seems to have been likely to get himself into trouble just by his very personality. And God saw to it that the trouble he would cause would mostly fall upon the enemies of Israel rather than upon Israel itself. And that would give him a direction. It would fence him in a more healthy form. It would not entirely tame, but at the very least put the guard dog to good use, where it's unlikely to harm somebody that is innocent. And the Levites seem to be treated in a similar way, that they are slightly dangerous. And you know what? Slightly dangerous people can be useful. Sometimes you need slightly dangerous people to take on the jobs that a lot of not dangerous people are simply refusing to do. This is something that we know from military service, that it is not always easy to get people to not just risk themselves, but it is also hard to get people to be willing to take a life, to be willing to fire or use a weapon in an act of hostility, even when completely justified and even when completely correct under the circumstances. You need people who are willing to do that, but you also need to make sure people who are willing to do that know that they should only do that at the appropriate time and under the appropriate circumstances. And the Levites are being given that job so that they can be of best use to the community.
Pinchas was also a Levite, correct?
So Pinchas, very interestingly, was a Levite, even though he was a grandson of Aaron. But because he was a grandson of Aaron who was already born at the time of Aaron and his son's appointment, he was not a Kohen initially. However, once he acted again with zealous violence to stop the immorality that was damaging the community, he then got a promotion to become a Kohen after that incident, so that he and his sons would actually be part of the Kohanic family. But so yes, he was a Levite by default, just like Moses and Aaron were originally, but he got a promotion from being just a non-Kohen grandchild of Aaron to becoming a Kohanic grandchild of Aaron. And that happened after he used violence.
Yeah. I don't know, I would feel uncomfortable having fanatics under control. Because the Levites were fanatics in some way.
So they were fanatics, but they weren't technically in control. Technically, the Kohanim were in control. And what do we know about the Kohanim? The description of Aaron and what we hope would be his nature and quality is that he was Rodef Shalom, that he was somebody that pursued peace. So it turned out that there were two threads of the Levite family. There were the fanatically prone to violence, and there was the smaller group with Aaron, and I would also argue Moses, fanatically prone to peace and reconciliation. People that would go to great lengths to try and find a way to reunite, to repair, to fix, to heal. And ultimately, it was the Aaron family that was put in charge. So the Kohanim were the ones who got to tell the Levi'im what to do. So it still, if you'll pardon the expression, kept a leash on the Levites to prevent their fanaticism from being the final word. They may have had the weapon, but they didn't actually have command. But we might still be a little jealous, to be honest. We saw at the very beginning that they are being advanced, or perhaps more literally, they are being brought close. That is our great word at the beginning of verse 6, hakrev, right? That is the same root word as korban, as a sacrifice. That is the great root word that is meaning to be closer to advance nearer to. It is a directional form. Why are they getting that honor? Because we know, this is now taken from Midrash Rabbah, based off Psalm 65, that happy is the one whom you have chosen and you have brought close. That when God brings somebody close, it is a source of happiness, it is a source of joy. It's something that we would all want. And we seem to be seeing in chapter 3 here that some of us are being treated differently than others. Some of us are being treated better than others. But the Midrash has a lot to say about this. Now, you're going to have to pay very careful attention to the wording because it is being used very precisely based off Psalm 65. So what does the analysis say? Happy is the one whom the Holy One, blessed be he, has chosen, even though he has not brought him close. And happy is the man that he has brought close, even though he has not chosen him. So Psalm 65 is being understood here as not a neutral, poetic, parallel, choosing and bringing close. They must mean the same thing. But instead, as is normal for the rabbis of the Midrashic era, they are saying there must be a difference between being chosen and being brought close. And there must be a difference between when God does it and when we do it, but more on that in a minute. So there are some that are chosen but not brought close, some that are brought close but are not chosen. And in typical Midrash fashion, we need to see some examples. Who is one whom he has chosen? This is Avraham. We can see in the book of Nehemiah, you are he, Lord God, who chose Avram. Very clear. But he did not bring him close. God did not bring Abraham close, but rather he, Abraham, brought himself close. Think for a moment about Abraham's story, and our understanding within Jewish tradition is it was Abraham who made himself a person that was close to God, and God chose Abraham to then have the covenant. That God's choosing was a response to Abraham's closeness, but Abraham's closeness was Abraham's own achievement, if you will. Case 2, the Holy One, blessed be he, chose Yaakov, as it is stated in Psalm 135, for Yaakov did the Lord choose. Very clear. And Isaiah 41:8, Yaakov, whom you have chosen. Repeated, doubly clear. But he did not bring him close, but rather he brought himself close. How do we know this? Genesis 25, Yaakov was a simple man that sat in tents, understood in Jewish tradition to mean that Yaakov was somebody that focused on study, that focused on learning, that focused on connecting to God and prayer and all of the other forms of a good and righteous life. So Yaakov, he did the work to get close. And God chose him, yes, because we can see from the text that God did choose him. But the closeness that came from Yaakov himself. One more example, he chose Moshe, Moses, as it is stated in Psalm 106, were it not for Moshe, his chosen. But he did not bring him close, meaning God did not bring Moses close. Instead, Moses chose to be close to God. We can see this most clearly in the example of the story of the burning bush. And then as a coda, happy are those that the Holy One, blessed be he, chose, even though he did not bring them close. Now, there's a lot to learn from this first paragraph, which is why I've divided up this extended midrash into clearer chunks. A lot about Abraham, Jacob, and Abraham, Isaac. Abraham, Jacob. I was right the first time. Abraham, Jacob, and Moshe. But more importantly, that there is a choosing and there is a drawing close, and that there are ways to be close to God that are human created, that are human generated, that are human centered, that start with our desire to be close to God, that start with our actions that make us close to God. So while we might feel a little resentment, jealousy, envy of our verse where the Levites are being brought close, this midrash is starting off by telling us that Abraham, Jacob, and Moses were not brought close either, and you would not say that they were missing out on their relationship with God. You wouldn't say that Abraham, Jacob, and Moses didn't have a close relationship with God. I mean, indeed, with Moses, no one has had a closer relationship than that. But they did not get the verb bringing them close. They did it on their own. And of course, God still chose them, even if God did not give them the verb of bringing them close. Is everyone following the implication there? All right, not hearing an objection or comment. Oh, John, yes.
Yeah, I keep thinking about the aspect of mercy versus the aspect of judgment. Is that part of what is at play here?
Well, I mean, we could look at it that way, but I think at the moment it's speaking about a more basic understanding of being close to God and whether or not that is something that is divinely granted or whether that is something that can be humanly earned. And the three examples that we are being given are showing human initiative, showing human merit that allows us to be close to God. And when God does choose to bring people close, we're going to see later, that doesn't always mean that they deserve it, or that means that they have been chosen in some very special task. So let's look at the contrasting situations and maybe develop that idea further. So in the next block, come and see, the Holy One, blessed be he, brought Yitro close, Abraham's father-in-law, but he did not choose him. He brought Rachav the prostitute close, but he did not choose her. Happy are these that whom he brought close, even though he did not choose them. So we can see that God reaches out to these people and gives them a way to come close to God. Indeed, all of them are, both of them are generally understood to have been inducted into the Jewish people and to have come close to God, and that God had a hand in opening the door for them, of preparing that avenue for them to approach. But God did not choose them independently. God did not give them a special brit. God did not give them a special responsibility. God merely, it's not such a small thing, allowed for the situation to incline them towards God, to come closer to God because of the circumstances that God arranged. And again, happy are those, right? Even though this is the opposite case of the ones we saw in the first paragraph, these two should be happy. They shouldn't resent that they were not given an individual covenant, an individual brit just by themselves. They should instead be very happy that God made it easier for them to come close, that God did some more of the work for them in order that they could draw close to God, that should also fill them with happiness. And the Roman matron, just one of my favorite little stories, a Roman matron asked Rabbi Yosef, does your God bring close whomever he wants? Meaning, so wait, does God just bring close people if he feels like it? Is there like no work? Because remember, our first paragraph said that drawing close was because of human effort, and it even implied that the human effort was what resulted in the choosingness. Does this mean that God is just helping these people, Yitro, Rachav, whoever he feels like? So he brought her a basket of figs, and she would choose a nice one and eat it. He said to her, you know how to choose. Does the Holy One, blessed be he, not? The one whom he sees has good deeds, he chooses him and brings him close. Now, he is kind of making a pun or a play on the concept of choosing, that there is choosing where it's a establishment of a brit, there is a choosing with a capital chew, and then there is choosing as selecting in order that a person will come close. And what he is saying is here is that it's not that God didn't choose them in any way, shape, or form. Yes, God may not have established a formal covenant or done a more extended form of choosing in a particular way, but God did select them because they were worthy. That both Yitro and Rechav were not picked out of random. God didn't just say, how about if we have that guy? How about if we have that girl? God looked at them and said, these are worthy people. I will find a way for them to come close to me. That there is a selection process for coming close. It is not a random selection. So we have now seen in both of our first two paragraphs that ultimately the drawing near to God is a human responsibility. Yes, how close we get and what also goes along with it, that is going to be in the hands of God. But to be able to draw close is something that we have to initiate, and then God will facilitate. Or if you're amazing like Abraham, Jacob, or Moses, maybe you don't even need additional facilitation. You can climb the way to God on your own and draw close under your own power. But in either case, it is the human initiative that is most important. And just to finish off this understanding of closeness and distance, Rabbi Nehemiah said in the name of Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak, not all who are close, and not all who are distant. Again, playing off our word from the verse about the Levites being brought close. There was one who was chosen and pushed off and brought close. There was one who was chosen and pushed off and not brought close. What do we mean? What examples? Aaron was chosen. We see from Samuel, I chose him from all the tribes of Israel for me as a priest. And he was pushed off, as we see recounted in Deuteronomy 9. And with Aaron did the Lord get angry in recounting the golden calf incident. And it is written, bring close to you Aaron, your brother. Exodus 28, after the golden calf incident, God chooses to have Aaron be brought back and be appointed as the Kohen Gadol. So this is the one who was chosen, pushed off, and brought close again, that sometimes there is a back and forth of this behavior, that sometimes it goes in different directions. And what is, of course, the distinguishing feature here? What did Aaron do in the meantime? Right? What is going on in this process? Aaron is choosing in his own life, sometimes good, sometimes mistakes, like with the golden calf. And so that is what is adjusting his relationship. It is not down to divine capriciousness. It is not down to God just playing blind favorites. And indeed, when God does choose other people, it's not always permanent, right? So we see from the second example, Shaul, King Saul was chosen, 1 Samuel 10. Have you seen the one that the Lord chose? And he was pushed off. Chapter 15, I have regretted that I have crowned Shaul. And he was not brought close, meaning he was not given a way to come back from chapter 16. I have been disgusted with him from ruling over Israel. So what happened in the meantime? Saul messed up. He messed up in a huge way by disobeying God's commands regarding the Amalekites and their loot. And God chose not to make it easy for Saul to return, not to make it easy for Saul to be restored to his position. Again, this chapter, like the ones we've seen before, says it all boils down to you, to your behavior. God responds to our action. God does not dictate our action. God is waiting and will occasionally make things easier, but ultimately it's in your hands to get the ball rolling and to keep it rolling in the right direction, because having been chosen doesn't mean you're always going to be close. You can still be pushed off if you deserve it. Questions or comments? All right, then let's look at just the last part of the Midrash here, and then we will try and relay it to our own current day situations. Rabbi Yoshua of Sachin said in the name of Rabbi Levi, there are 6 that were chosen: the priesthood, the order of Levi, Israel, the monarchy of the house of David, Jerusalem, and the temple. So what he is implying is that if you look through the text of the Tanakh, the term to be chosen by God, this bechira, this chosenness, is applied to 6 different things. The priesthood, the order of Levi, that should be obvious from our discussion this morning. Israel, meaning the nation of Israel as a whole, the people Israel, Am Yisrael. The house of David, for the kingship of David. Jerusalem, the city, choosing to be that the seat, and the temple itself as being a place of devotion. So those are the things that have been chosen. Now, the Holy One, blessed be He, chose Levi, as it is stated in Deuteronomy 18:5, and he was chosen by the Lord your God. And from where do we know that he brought him close? To go back to our initial discussion of choosing and bringing close, as it is stated, bring close the tribe of Levi and stand it up, our verse. And about them, the verse from Psalm 65 says, happy is the one whom you have chosen and whom you have brought close, who dwells in your courtyard. As it says in verse 3:7, and they shall keep his charge and the charge of the whole congregation. And the continuation of that Psalm of 65 goes on to say, let us be satiated from the good of your house. That is to say, they would eat from the tithes that were brought to the temple, as you would say in chapter 18 of the book of Bamidbar, to the house of Levi, behold, I have given all tithe in Israel for an inheritance. Let's just make sure that that's understood in each of its pieces. The Levites were chosen, they had a certain job, and they were brought close, as they were described in our verse. And what does that mean? They are happy, but in particular for them, because they were chosen and brought close, they got both of those verbs together, they will be satiated, as the Psalm says. How do we know they were satiated? They were given the tithing that was brought in by the people of Israel, a very physical form of satiation, satiating their hunger. Now, this entire conversation should have been provoking a lot of consideration in the back of your mind regarding chosenness, of what does it mean to be chosen, of what does it mean to have been selected. Hopefully you have seen that in the Jewish concept of selection, selection means selection for responsibility. Selection means selection for duty. This is being voluntold to do something, whether it be guarding the temple, whether it be keeping the mitzvot, whether it be being responsible as the king of the nation. Those duties are not always pleasant. Those duties are not always easy. In fact, all of them are difficult. And those duties are not always rewarded as lucratively and materially as you might think. The tithing was there to sustain the Levites, but given that they were denied any other portion of the inheritance of the land, that was all that would sustain them. This was not like they were sitting back on a pile of food, enjoying the high life while everyone else was slaving away in the fields. They were dependent, and their personal fortunes rose and fell depending upon the fortune of the nation as a whole. So chosenness in Judaism has a very heavy feel to it. It is something that we are happy and pleased about, hence the repetition of happy is the one, happy is the one, happy is the one. But we take that as a very serious response to a very serious duty. It is not happiness of the indolent. It is not happiness of the wealthy. It is not the happiness of the lazy. It is the happiness of a person who rejoices in the work that they are doing, but recognizes the work they are doing is sometimes more burdensome than other people have. Unfortunately, this concept of chosenness continues to bedevil the people who relate to us. They somehow fixate on this word of, oh, you think you're the chosen people, as though somehow we think we are better than everyone else, or somehow we think that we are more deserving than everyone else. We know that there are people who were not chosen for certain duties that were absolutely deserving. We just saw Rachav and Yitro as two examples of that. And we know that the people who were chosen were only chosen because they worked hard to accomplish it, to achieve it. If you are to choose a valedictorian for your school, doing it because the student has earned it seems eminently fair, seems perfectly fine. And recognizing that being valedictorian just means you have more work to do now is something that should be borne in mind. You know, as someone put in chat, you know, with great power comes great responsibilities, or as I like to put it more generally, the reward for good work is more work. But sometimes the reward for sometimes you just get more work, not even necessarily because you have done good work. That is to say, God can choose for the Israelite people to have a certain job, even though at that time we ourselves were not doing a great job. Now, we've done pretty well since, because we're still here and the Torah is still around and still controlling our communities and guiding our life. But that was not always clear in every generation. And for those that resent us for being chosen, in quotes, I can simply point to the Midrash and our understanding of all of this, that nothing is stopping anyone from being close to God. Jew and non-Jew has to do that work themselves. That Jew or non-Jew is responsible for the choices they make, for the life that they live, for the values that they hold as their highest and those that they reject. That is up to each of us individually. And that is the ultimate way that we are measured. We don't get a free pass because we are chosen. To the contrary, often more has been demanded of us because we have been given more instruction in order to know how we should draw close. And if we fail in that, we don't have a very good excuse. We know how we should be behaving to draw close to God, and we should be doing it. So the world is equally able to draw near to God. We just have a particular way of doing it. That is our choosing. The same way the Levites had a particular way of drawing near in their job, and the Kohanim and the monarchy of David and others. There are particular ways to draw near that are given to different people, but the drawing near is ultimately each person's responsibility, and not something to begrudge or be envious of for another person, but to look to yourself to make sure you are climbing that mountain in your best effort. And as we continue to pray for peace and safety in Israel, it's a reminder that many people continue to resent the small land of Israel that wishes to live in peace and safety within its borders and to enjoy the inheritance of 3,000 plus years with peace and safety and not having to be made afraid. And they still think that somehow we are arrogant for considering ourselves chosen. We don't consider ourselves better than others, but we do consider ourselves at least equal to others in that we are deserving of those basic things: a home, a place to feel safe, and the ability to have peace with those around us. May it happen quickly, and may it happen universally. Any other questions or comments that people would like to share?
Not about this show, by the way, Rabbi, I really enjoyed the end. Your ending was very nice. Really.
Thank you.
But by the way, I haven't yet received the link for the recording program for this week.
Correct. The Monday program regarding separation of church and state, I have not gotten that link yet either.
Oh, okay.
So I wasn't the one recording because it was a different group hosting. So I do not have the local recording, so I'm waiting for them to give that to me.
Okay.
And I will definitely share that once I get it.
And I was thinking about what you say that when also God took out the closeness, the chosenness from some people, and not only Saul, also Eliyahu, also the prophet. When he decided that he felt he didn't have the passion with the people of Israel, he said, "You know what? That's okay. Your term is done. Okay, go and pick your success. Your next
right.
one."
Yes, exactly right. Eliyahu Hanavi. I wouldn't actually say that he lacked the passion. Unfortunately, Eliyahu Hanavi had plenty of passion. He just didn't have any patience for the people of Israel anymore. And so, yes, he needed to be retired from his job, because it wasn't just about being passionate for God. He also had to be passionate for the people.
Yeah, and at least I came to the picture. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. Please do stay informed regarding the news in Israel, and do continue to advocate and support her in any way that you can. And let's hope that the current flare-up is able to be tamped down, and we can get back to some level of safety and eventually working more towards peace for everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi Yasher Koach. Have a good day.
Take care, everyone.